This is the smallest car that we've ever worked on. I'll get down to its level. So a 1995, 96 Rover Mini. So this was actually imported to Australia from Japan. It's quite popular right now. You can go on to car sales and look for this era Mini, and they're all Japanese imports, right-hand drive, of course. And the Mini, the last sort of generation of Minis before it, they changed. The last classic Minis, we didn't get them locally in Australia, so the best place to get them is Japan. They're all well looked after, low kilometres, and that's what the previous owner of this car had done. This is also an auto, which does, I guess, make it easier to drive, but it kind of loses a lot. This motor was never that powerful, and you really needed to drive it right on its edge to get the most out of it, and that means being in the right gear at the right time. The auto, unfortunately, is not fantastic. It doesn't feel fantastic to shift, but it also just isn't shifting in the right way. It's not a modern auto, let's say, and there's not a lot of space to fit it. This engine bay is very cramped, as they took a 60s engine bay and kept filling it with stuff to make it, I guess, not even compete, but just bring it up to standards, bring it up to the expectations of reliability and almost performance in a lot of ways. The handling is still fantastic, but it leaves a little bit to be desired. I don't think it's in its peak performance, let's say. But behind it, you can see the guys actually getting ready, getting the system ready to install. So this will come out tomorrow, and we'll start getting that electrification system in. The great thing is that the performance is obviously much better, but not crazy. The weight balance is the same. The overall weight is the same. So essentially the handling remains. And if there's anything that these cars are about, so I'm told, right? I have not driven a classic Mini before this one. It's the handling that is what makes these. So I'm looking forward to getting in the car. Okay. My second drive of this car. Come to Trade Zone. I've picked up the 35mm lugs for someone who's crimping something, I think, on a Defender. But let's have another drive. The charming high-pitched beep noise that the Mini makes. Maybe people love that. I'm not sure. I don't know if I like it. Anyway, it's there. Starts first time every time. This gearbox is, well, okay, the gearbox, well, it doesn't shift well. The shifter itself is kind of garbage. I don't think that's how it came from factory. It's sort of got a shaped mechanism like a Toyota that, you know, has very clear, distinct pattern that you've got to move through. It's sort of got that, but they've like only half tried. It says that it's in reverse. It's clearly not. There we go. All right, drive's a bit easier. The turning. It's all about the turning. All right, I'm going to take the long way back. About 1 minute longer. It's just the disappointing thing. You can hear, well, you probably could see and feel that gear shift that was just very awkward and abrupt, but not in a quick way that you want a gear shift, just in an abrupt, annoying way that, you know, if you're the passenger, you get a bit car sick from the driver doing. Right, we're being a bit cautious. There's people around, other cars. Let's get into the open industrial estate. Got to point out that I'm never actually going over the speed limit at all here. It's just, I'm in a Mini and every speed feels fast and fun. I don't know where that road would get me in. Roundabouts are fun. I'd accelerate out of the corner if my foot fitted on the pedal. Work boots are not the shoes to drive a Mini in. Anyway. Just that lump on shift. We'll get rid of that. But I'm quite comfortable in the driving position. I'm not saying I'm wanting to do a huge trip, but even though you can see that messing up my hairdo, It's just my header, it's not my actual head. Here's all the stuff that's going to turn a Mini like that into an electric Mini. Starting from the bash guard, which is I guess the last thing we'll install, but the piece that basically goes under and protects the new motor, the new gearbox, everything, because the Mini is of course sitting quite low to the road. Then we've got a DC-DC converter. So that's kind of like the alternator. It takes the high voltage from the pack, the 400 volts, and turns it into 12 volts. These spit out about 100 amps continuously, so more power than you ever really need at, like 13.9 volts or whatever it actually spits out. Then you've got the heater system, so a replacement heater system which has a high voltage PTC in here. So essentially a 400 volt heating element, which makes it very, very efficient. High voltage in, control wiring to set that the amount of current it's using, so how hot it is, and then a new blower fan assembly and everything. In here we've got some of the charging stuff. So that's the plug or the socket that will be on the car, the Australian standard Type 2 plug, a new sort of receptacle cover cap that we've developed that fits. It's a real challenge to kind of fit some of this in a Land Rover, not so much. In a Mini where everything was small to begin with, quite a tricky part to make with a little locking actuator as well. Bunch of bracketry to hold some of those pieces, and also the charger. So this is a 6.6 kilowatt single phase AC charger, 240 volt. So basically this can plug into, this is for your home, this is for most public charging. This is good to charge the Mini in about 2 to 3 hours, depending on your state of charge and the speed of the charger you're connected to. Bunch of cable, a bunch of interconnects and plugs, and service disconnect fuses for the front and rear pack. The inertia switch, which is essentially for a crash, right? If this you set this, and if it was to, you can hear that, and that's basically open the relay, which turns the high voltage system off. So that meets all global standards, of course Australian standards around how you disable the high voltage system in case of a crash. Traditionally, this would be used to connect to the fuel pump. So if it sensed a crash and turned off, then the fuel pump would be turned off. But for us, that means turning off the high voltage supply. A bunch of cables that connect the front and rear battery pack, also some control wiring to the VCU, to other areas of the car, all the control wires that we'll be putting around the vehicle. Little clamps, little 3D printed clamps that will go on the, I guess, cable tray, cable support to hold down these wires that, or cables that connect front to rear. Some control stuff. So new throttle pedal. It's obviously a digital throttle pedal going into the VCU, bracket to get that in the right place. New shift mechanism on a brush metal plate that covers up the, the hole from the old transmission shifter. Drive, neutral, reverse, and reverse is in a little lockout. I can't do that with one hand, but basically you pull that up and that allows you to get into reverse gear. The frame, part of the frame that is still the shipping frame that's still holding the rear battery pack. So this sits in where the spare wheel was, drops into that sort of cavity, and then gives you a flush floor in the boot. So you've still got plenty of boot space. Then new drive shafts, or new old drive shafts, but the key bit is these that couple into the output of the gearbox, the new gearbox. And then some new, look, I'm so used to four-wheel drives and live axles, I'm not sure of the exact words for some of these parts, but we've basically upgraded all these and replaced all these just as, once it's all out, once you're doing this is the easy time to do some of these other upgrades as well. This is where it gets more complex and interesting. This is the front subframe. This would be the front of the car here. Very little radiator standing out. It doesn't need to be too big. It's cooling the electric motor and the inverter. Those are all running like 30-40 degrees. Not very hot. Just needs to just have a little bit of cooling to keep all that under control. And then because it's not running too hot, really expansion, you just need a tank at a high point to be able to fill. It's got a little fan on the back, a little small fan that we control just in case we do need a little bit of extra cooling, but really it's just running in a kind of nice slow speed loop to keep that regulated. In here you can see the gearbox This is kind of the gearbox side, the motor's back there. And this is the gearbox that then is a single speed box, splits it out to the left and right rear passenger driver's wheel. We're looking at the passenger side here, so that's where one of those drive shafts would plug into and come out this little hole. This subframe that it's all mounted to, the black metal piece, is, I guess, a modified original. So BMH make these. We've asked them to modify it in various areas to give us an ability to mount all our systems on. But this then allows us to just bolt in directly where the old subframe was, which makes that install very, very quick. You can see it's already got the brake lines mounted, looping around. You've got the vacuum pump for the brakes to give vacuum pressure, a little expansion tank for the vacuum here, and this is kind of the first glimpse of the electric motor that's right there. Then, continues around to that brake line, so we're not having to, we can connect basically to the original brake output for the passenger side wheel. Up here you've got the inverter, which is the thing that takes the high voltage DC, positive and negative, and spits it out into the three-phase AC that the motor needs, and also does it the other way so that you can essentially turn the motor, which is what regenerative braking is, and then spit it back into the battery pack to create energy. Then the last thing which sits on the top of that is the front battery pack. You can see it's got quite a complex shape to accommodate, fitting around everything we've got to put in there, but also everything that's in the car itself, including things like a little cutout here for the hinge for the bonnet, some other clearance issues. The packaging on this is incredibly tight, but it needs to be, and that's the beauty. We can fit 20 kilowatt hours of battery and really not intrude in any way into the cabin, not reduce the load space, all of these kinds of things, and really make the Mini to the same spec that it was, apart from the performance and the emissions and all those good electric things. This has still got its lifting points on. This allows you to lift the whole subframe if this is connected, but also the install process is basically the subframe, or the Mini, let's say, drops over this subframe. Then once that's in, you lower the battery pack into the Mini itself. And then once you've done that, you've fitted all this stuff into that, and you've got an electric Mini. I'm honestly not used to a mechanical throttle linkage, because you've got that little, it's just a bit worn out, right? You've got a spring and everything, but you've got the play from the mechanical side rather than a digital throttle, which I'm used to in our electric cars, but even just my car that I drive to work, which is just a Honda Jazz, which has a digital throttle, or an electronic throttle, I guess. Underneath the Mini here is where you can see most of the stuff that we're going to be removing. So the engine, of course, on its subframe, and that whole subframe will drop down to be replaced by our new subframe, custom designed to support all the battery and motor system. But the suspension remains the same, the drive shafts remain the same. There's a bash guard here, you can see, because everything's low on these cars. You can see how much this has been beaten up and done its job of accepting some bashes. What you can also see is this sort of heat shield on the exhaust is also quite a low point, and this is actually quite torn up as well and compressed. It's had a few little hits there, but we replaced this bash guard after we put in the new subframe and motor assembly here. The exhaust, of course, disappears. So this tunnel along here is a cavity that supports a little bit of control linkages for the auto gearbox here, and I guess more if there was a manual transmission. But then it's mostly for the exhaust, the mufflers. As we go back, that all comes out, and what we do is put I guess it's a cable tray across here that then supports the high voltage lines from the front to rear battery pack, the chargers, everything like that, and all the control wires. It's still a thick piece of metal, and then it sits flush to the floor pan. So we actually improved the ground clearance. Is that things people talk about in Minis at all? I'm too into four-wheel drive world. But we do improve the ground clearance, and we have that cable tray bash guard running the full length of the car to interconnect the two battery packs. The other thing that's removed is, of course, the fuel lines, or the fuel line running front to rear, because the fuel tank's up here in the back. The brake lines remain the same. The whole braking system really remains the same. We've got discs in the front, drums in the rear, handbrakes remain the same. The rear end here on the Mini, of course, as a front-wheel drive car, they just spin or they brake when you apply the brake. So that's quite a simple system that we don't need to touch. And then a few other mods in the rear, of course, to just allow interconnect through into the boot, I guess, and the storage compartment in there where the battery will. But really quite simple under here. And the reason this can be done so quickly is because the majority of the complex stuff, the mechanical stuff, is on a single subframe here in the front that we're about to drop down. I actually quite like the feel of the brakes. They're boosted, obviously, but they're not just that really, and look, I don't know, maybe they're worn out, but they're not that, there's a progressive nature to them. They're not just that on-off nature that you feel with, and that minimal travel that like a modern small car will have. I've got to put some effort into it. The brakes are right there, but I like it. We'll be putting soundproofing across the whole floor pan, front and rear, and on the bulkhead, because an electric motor is a lot quieter, but there's still noise. It still makes, the motor makes a noise, the gearbox still has a noise. The ambient level is so much quieter though, and at such a different frequency, you don't have that kind of low explosion noises that you do in an internal combustion engine, that it means that you notice other things. You notice the tyre noise, which is, you know, the tyres are just here and here. You notice any water splatter from the tyres onto the wheel arches. You notice any rocks flicking up. You notice the wind noise more. So all these other noises become more audible, more noticeable at least, and you want to actually start to create that more cocoon, that nice little ambient space here, and to do that you need to add soundproofing. Soundproofing helps any car feel more luxurious, it's less fatiguing, all of that, but it's a particularly noticeable thing on EVs because you've reduced the main noise-making thing from the front of the car. Am I just enamored with its cuteness? And maybe I like everything, maybe it's new. I don't think so. I think that when you first drive an old Land Rover, it's terrifying and it's bad. It's objectively bad. You learn to love it, and it has these amazing abilities in other situations. This is fun, very quickly, very fun. That cornering is very quickly. The feeling of control that you have over this car, the direct relationship, I think, of the unassisted steering, where you feel you're really holding it in just like a go-kart. I get that comparison now. You're obviously in a small car. It's not just that. It's the steering feels like a go-kart. That's shifting. I'm going to do one more lap of this and then come back. But that ability to put power down through the corners, doing like 45, but still feeling like you're having a really fun time. If only it would shift in a nicer way. Yeah, I just want to choose the gears. I mean, I can choose 1, 2, 3, 4 on the gearbox, on the auto shifter, but I don't think that's going to be a good idea. We've got the dash out now, and while it's upside down, you can still get a pretty good sense of its incredible quality, let's say. A lot of veneer. And yeah, veneer wood is premium, right? But maybe not so premium when it's wrapped around a corner, clearly showing that it's not the wood grain, because the wood wouldn't look like that if it was actually cut. I don't know. Sometimes I'm confused about the point of veneer, particularly in cars, and how it's applied. I mean, you know, not against brown and texture and wood, but it's always a little bit confusing in this style that is very much just a generic shape. There was some other sort of, I guess, quality aspects, ignoring the fact that it's, 30 years old and cracked and faded a little bit, but just some of this like clip-on plastic trim that is, I guess, it's a single DIN, like a standard stereo hole, but then just bits of stick-on plastic chrome that isn't the right size, isn't mitered at the corners. I don't get it. Does that drawing attention to the bad quality and fitment of the part? I don't quite understand. My workshop has the slowest gate. All right, so a slow and controlled return to the workshop, but I get it. I was getting embarrassed. I put these out in public, but when other people from work here see me recording, I'm all embarrassed. It's really weird. We've now really removed everything in the interior, so you can see in here that it's a little bit of a mess maybe, but we've stripped out everything. All the carpet's been removed. We're able now to put the new car builders soundproofing across the floor here, and removing that lower dash trim panel here allows us to put in the new dash panel. So it's a bit of a squeeze to get in the, I guess, 60s style dash panel. So we can remove some of these trim pieces, these soft elements, and you can see this one's loose as well. We can remove those soft elements that were put in basically to start meeting head impact requirements from the 1970s. So they basically took the metal framework and just added some softness in front of it, which is compliant and does protect your head in an injury. But, you know, the smallest changes you can do, the better, was basically the approach of the British motoring industry. So works for us. We can transition this back to a more retro style dash and begin the installation of all the soundproofing. So that's it, back in the hoist. This is probably the last time anyone's going to drive this with the original petrol engine. I get it. I really like it. I don't know if... I'm conscious that we are electrifying classics. The world has decided that these cars should stay in production or are worth keeping. It's not that I love old cars or old cars are better. It's that occasionally, a few cars a decade, do they stumble upon something that just makes a car great, and those are the cars that have this continued life and are worth putting this extra money in, worth electrifying, worth falling in love with, I guess, and so that I'm lucky to be able to drive these cars that I guess have already been selected. They're the greatest hits of automotive, and so this simple little car, they did touch on some magic. It just feels great. It feels right. I'd love to drive this in a city. I'd love to drive this through some, country lanes in the UK where this was developed, or the electric system, or the car was developed, and the electrification system for this was developed. I think it would be perfect. I'm excited to drive it electric.